Well, today's a distinct pleasure to introduce you to Dick McDonell, a long-standing friend of mine who's come to Red Deer, like my father did, from the big city to the small city. Found it so enticing, enjoyable, exciting, and opportunistic that he stayed, and so has Dick. So for 40 years, Dick, you've become an increasingly significant part of the community of Red Deer and its growth. So it's a pleasure today to go over some of the highlights of that time, but perhaps we can start with how you got to Red Deer, or what incited you or brought you, what was the stimulus? And
Well, quite by accident. I had been working for a finance company for a number of years. I started with them in Calgary in 72, I'm sorry. And with that kind of work comes transfers. And from Calgary, we went to Nelson, BC. And from Nelson, we went to Brooks. And then from Brooks to Red Deer. And arrived here in 1978 and made it our home ever since. No desire to leave.
What was it that kept you in Red Deer, or how did you decide to stay in Red Deer? You already had a job, but that's not the way things turned out.
No, several factors caused us to stay here. A, our families were both in Edmonton, so it was handy, it was convenient. Plus, Red Deer was considerably bigger than either Brooks or Nelson, so there were many more amenities in Red Deer than the two previous towns we lived in. And actually, I had got a phone call from the regional office at one point saying, we're not offering you this job, but would you be interested in a move to Edmonton? And Diane and I sat down and chatted about it, and we decided no. We'd had these 3 moves over a short period of time. We weren't really enjoying this moving around. Plus, our daughter was about to go into kindergarten. She had friends across the street, sort of thing. And no, why don't we just stay here? This will be good for her. It'll be comfortable for us. So we stayed.
Yeah, but in deciding to stay, you had no job because you left the job you had.
Well, I wasn't without a job per se. I had the job and I stayed and I worked at it till 1981 and decided that if we're going to stay here, let's set up a little business. The idea of having a business had always interested me, and I decided to set up a property management agency, which I did, and ran it for 20 years.
It was you chose perhaps the best of times, in some ways the worst of times, to go into property management. How did that turn out for you?
Sure.
There were certainly some major business challenges at the time.
Yeah. Well, property management, I picked that for a couple of reasons. Firstly, early in my career, I had worked in property management in Edmonton for Canada Permanent Trust, so I knew a little bit about the business. But as far as the timing, in the early 1980s, interest rates were going through the roof. And we had a mortgage. We were a young couple with a mortgage. And at one point, the mortgage was renewed for 20.25%, which, were we going to keep the house for a year? We couldn't be absolutely sure because we had this new business. But at the same time is that we were struggling with a high rate mortgage. Others were too. And in the 1970s, there had been an awful lot of multifamily developments, apartment blocks, townhouses, and whatnot constructed. And they were paying 20.25% on their mortgages too. So there was an awful lot of foreclosures. So I had this very small property management business, and all of a sudden the phone's ringing off the hook with lawyers and trust companies and banks that were foreclosing on these multi-unit properties. So the business really took off. We managed these properties, and eventually they were sold. And in many cases, the buyers kept us on as property managers. So the business really grew. So it was, what's that saying? The best of times, the worst of times.
And making the most of times.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
I'll go with that.
I remember that occasion because my wife had a condo in Calgary, and the offer of renewal was a fixed 5 years, 22 or 22.25% from Fidelity Trust, a company better known because its owner was a gentleman named Peter Pocklington.
Oh, jeez.
So
She knows how to pick them.
Fortunately, the Royal Bank manageress said, "Why don't you get a variable mortgage?" And she ran that all the way down to 12%.
Wow.
So you're right, the best of times and maybe the luckiest of times.
Yeah.
Well, can you tell us some of the highlights in your business or business development time and career in Red Deer? I think you called your company Manor Management.
Yes.
Where the name came from.
Well, I had thought of naming it McDonell Management, but I thought, that doesn't really ring a bell, but I wanted to keep the M. So Diane and I sat around and came up with a bunch of appropriate words that started with M, and her idea was Manor Management. So we were registering the company through our lawyer, Herbert Fielding, and we just handed all the names to him and said, whichever one clicks, whatever works. So he called back a few days later and he said, "Am I speaking to the president of Manor Management?" So yes, he was. And
did you tell him he has a good manner?
No, I didn't. I didn't catch that one.
Well, tell us some of the highlights from your time as a manager. Never easy, not always easy, and
no,
it can be challenges day and night.
Oh yeah, there's always something happening. On one side you've got the clients who obviously want maximum revenue from their property and minimum expenses, and sometimes that doesn't work out too well. And with tenants, again, you've got the good, the bad, and the ugly. And we did a fairly good job, I think, of screening, and we didn't get too many real disaster tenants. I inherited a few on buildings that we acquired the management of, but for the most part, we screened them fairly well. 9 years working for a finance company where you're always screening people. I think it was a head start for us.
It's perhaps a side of you that I've never seen, Dick. You're always so nice and agreeable, and you have so many good ideas and thoughtful comments to make. There must be another side which says...
Well, I'm glad none of my clients ever heard anybody refer to me as nice and agreeable. And they want a grumpy landlord for a client, or for a property manager, I should say. Sorry. Yeah.
Well, one of the, and perhaps it's indirectly related to your property management, because opportunities certainly crop up, and it sometimes takes vision and other talents and financing, of course, to enter into some of them. But the one that's always intrigued us, and I think intrigued the community, is your preservation of the old courthouse. And perhaps you tell us a bit about how that came about and where it's at now.
Well, I'd always admired the building. I like grand old architecture, and I'd always admired the building from the day we moved to Red Deer. And then in '83, I guess it was they opened the new courthouse, and I had in mind that obviously some big law firm would move in and take it over. Well, that didn't happen. They left it with the Allied Arts Council, I believe, and they ran it, and if I may dare say so, not very well. And it was costing the city money. The city owned it. So they, in 2000, put it up for sale. And when I saw that, this is an opportunity, we've got to jump on this. And I thought, who else might be interested? Well, I know Jim Dixon, who was then practicing with Herbert Fielding. He had an interest in old architecture too, so I phoned Jim, and what do you think? Should we go for it? Absolutely. So we put our names up and we're toured through the place and looked at the finances and everything else, and we really thought there'd be a lot more interest in it. We thought there'd be a lineup of people wanting to get this building, but there was only one other offer, and it was ridiculously low, so we were the lucky bidders. And I remember after we attended the city council meeting at which they made the decision to sell the building to us. And I remember after the meeting, Jim and I walked out into City Hall Park and sat on a bench there, just looked at the building and like, do you believe it that this thing is going to be ours? And very happy with it. We did an awful lot of work on it. We were restoring it, and we tried to restore it to as close to original as possible. There were things that couldn't be maintained original, one being the boiler, which was burning through about $4,500 worth of gas in a winter month. We replaced those. But as far as what the place looks like, for instance, the doors were all sanded and varnished, and the only names people can put on the door are in the same type of font that was used originally. Because we found a door downstairs that had the original lettering on it, and our sign guy at the time was Mort Spellman, and we took him downstairs and says, "Can you replicate this?" And he says, "Yes." So that's the lettering on the doors, and there's just so many other things. Jim took over what had been the court clerk's office, about 1,500 square feet on the main floor, and set up his practice there. And all the furnishings, the counters and everything else, he had designed to look as it would have looked in 1930. So things like that.
You certainly brought an interesting group of people from Red Deer with quite a wide variety of talents and competences and so on into the building as tenants.
Oh, sure.
If you were working in the building, it had to be kind of a fascinating coffee break with the shoulders that you got to rub with, from the artists to architects to
art school, architects. Had a couple of lawyers, financial planners we've had in there, at least 3 psychologists over time, and in the basement it's all musicians.
That's an interesting opportunity for the tenants.
Musicians, let's face it, musicians are either filthy rich or they're starving. And starving musicians can afford the level of rent that's paid in the basement of our building. It's quite reasonable.
Well, I'm sure you've been serenaded down there a number of times.
Oh, absolutely.
One of the highlights of that building, aside from its central location in downtown Red Deer, is the vista. Mm-hmm. And you've improved the vista view by adding a clock so that people's eyes are drawn to the building. And
well, the clock isn't ours. The clock is a project of the Rotary Club of Red Deer, which you and I are both members, and it honors Citizens of the Year. And I just love having it in front of our place, sure.
With some very interesting names and so on at the bottom.
Absolutely.
The Rotary Club Citizens of the Year are all listed there.
Mm-hmm.
So it's interesting to go through and look at how that program has evolved, particularly recently through the Rotary Club. Mm-hmm. And the other thing, of course, that looks on is the Kerrywood Park, or at least that's how I knew it.
At the City Hall Park.
City Hall Park, and beautifully lit outside at Christmas.
Mm-hmm. But being a greedy, self-centered kind of person I am, I made my office the former judge's office, which is the one sitting immediately above the front door. And I think it is the finest office in the city of Red Deer, bar none. And yeah, the vista, you're right, it's wonderful. You look out there and there's City Hall Park with all the flowers in the summer and all the Christmas lights in the winter. And vista, that's the right word. You used the right word there, yeah.
Well, of course, being a courthouse, there were some significant court decisions made there, and mm-hmm. one that you've spent a bit of time researching and sharing with us is the one on Robert Raymond Cook.
Right, the Robert Raymond Cook trial. That was something, and to me, it shows so much about how things have changed in terms of law. And I'm not a lawyer, but how things have changed over the years, because Robert Raymond Cook was convicted of murdering 7 people, 7 persons of his family. His father, his stepmother, and 5 step-siblings, ranging in age from, I think, 3 to 9. It was a terrible, terrible, terrible crime. But the speed at which it went, the crime was committed in June. He was arrested within a day or two of the crime being committed. So from June of 1959, he was tried, convicted, sentenced to hang. His lawyer appealed. The appeal was granted. A second trial was held. He was tried, convicted, and sentenced to hang. And finally it went to the Governor General in Council, I think they refer to it, in Ottawa, final appeal, and that appeal was denied. And he was hung in November of 1960. So in 17 months, you've got 2 trials, an appeal, and the execution taking place. It seems to me the system worked a lot better then than it does now, where even routine cases take 3 or 4 years.
As with appeals so common and appeals up the line, so many. And it was, I know it was a riveting story or of concern for people in Red Deer, in part because the event occurred in Stettler. So I recall, but the trial was in Red Deer. So we ended up with most of the publicity that surrounded it, and certainly kept front page of the Advocate for many days.
Yeah. Well, there's a good book
But
on it.
it's also the last hanging in Alberta.
The last hanging in Alberta. Yep, that was it. And
I'm not sure you want to be famous for that.
no. History is what it is. It is what it is.
Yeah.
But shortly after we bought the building, we were approached by a theater group in Calgary, and one of their members had written a 55-minute play on the Robert Raymond Cook trial. And would it be possible to hold performances of this play in our building? Well, to twist our arm, the courtroom isn't rented yet, so have at it. It was a two-person play. Cook and his lawyer, David McNaughton. They were the only 2 characters in the play. And they came, and at the time, the fire inspector's little sign was just inside the front door of the courtroom, and it said capacity limited to 60 people. Well, once that play started, 60 people, to heck with that. We had them sitting on the door sills, we had them sitting on the radiators. We times had 100 people in there, in that little courtroom, watching the play. And because it was only a 55-minute play, there was always a question and answer period. Because many of these people in the audience had clear recollections of the events of the Cook murders and trial. And so the 2 actors, the writer and the director, would sit up front, and they would answer any questions. Well, one night, David McNaughton, who was then Judge David McNaughton, showed up. And we invited him to join them at the front. Well, there were no questions for the theater people at all. Everything was addressed to David McNaughton because he was Cook's lawyer.
Yeah.
So the one question I so clearly remember is, Mr. McNaughton, you worked with Mr. Cook for over a year. You got to know him very well. What do you think? Did he do it? Because Cook always maintained his innocence. But the question was, did he do it? And Judge McNaughton, I remember he paused for a minute. He gave the question some thought. And then he said, I don't know. What I do know is that he went to the gallows believing himself to be innocent. Just, lots to chew on there.
there truly is, especially now that the country's maintained its position. No deaths. You can be sentenced for life, but there's none of this hanging anymore.
No.
So in that sense, it is a benchmark. But the courthouse course, is a central part of Alberta, or Red Deer rather, dating from what, 1928 is it?
1930. It was built in 1930-31,
Yeah.
and it opened March 6th, 1931. And if you drive by on March 6th of any given year, you'll find the Canadian maple leaf flag is not there. The red ensign, which was Canada's flag at the time, that's the one that'll be flying on March 6th.
That's the one that the owner flies then?
Mm-hmm.
Each anniversary.
Yep, we do.
Dick, are there any other generalizations or general observations you'd like to make about the business community in town, its impact, and particularly the fact that you're downtown, and like any city that's more recently gone on a sprawl and has extended peripherally, it's been rather hard on the downtown core to maintain it from a real estate point of view or a successful rental point of view.
Right. Well, if you have an office building and it doesn't have any particular appeal, you could be looking at 100% vacancy. And I remember reading a newspaper article. I was doing some research on something, and a newspaper article from back in the 80s, and the downtown jewelry store had moved to Bauer Mall. And the newspaper reporter asked, "Why are you moving?" And what the fellow said was, "Because Ross Street is no longer a shopping street. Business street, but not a shopping street." Because shopping all over North America had moved to the malls. They were indoor malls. They were comfortable, and that's where people did their shopping. So retail has been a struggle downtown for many years, and there are some places that do well. I guess they're specialty shops and small restaurants and whatnot seem to do okay. But as far as being the hub of business, no, downtown is not the hub of business anymore. And I think that that's been exacerbated in recent years by Gasoline Alley. You're in the county and they claim to be rural, so they get massive tax breaks, and businesses are moving out there. So downtown is struggling, but it will always be there. We've got the current courthouse is downtown, and the new one being built is downtown. You're always going to have the legal profession concentrated there. So, there will be other businesses and professions that surround that. So it'll survive, but it's not the business capital of Red Deer anymore.
The central facilities for the city too, of course, have expanded dramatically as the populations exceeded 100,000, and they of course require a fair bit of rental space or space that they build and own over the years. Oh,
for sure. Yeah, we get a city that's gone from 35,000 to 100,000 just in the time we've lived here. It's triple in size. An awful lot of changes, and it's been interesting to watch.
Dick, you also have developed over the years. You and Diane have developed some very interesting avocational interests, and I wonder if you'd like to tell us about some of those and some of the involvements you've had because of your contacts, your interests, and
Sure. Well, Diane has a lovely singing voice, and shortly after we arrived in Red Deer, she got involved with Central Alberta Theatre, and she was an actress in several plays and musicals particularly, and she directed one at one point. Point of view of avocation, that's where I think she's stood out, sort of thing. I always seem to have some avocational things on the go. From way back when I was in my early teens, automobile racing has appealed to me, and I did race sports cars in the 60s and early 70s as finances would permit, because it's an expensive hobby. And then I went back, after 17 years, I went back and raced an oval track for 6 seasons, oval track racing, modifieds. So that was great fun. When I left racing, I didn't want to leave the racing community because there's really interesting people there. They really are. People of multiple talents and whatnot. So that's when I decided.
Not just turning a steering wheel.
Oh no, there's some really clever business people, and there are people whose engineering and mechanical skills are just exemplary. Really, really smart people, and it's unlike a team sport where you be at a place at a certain time, and you're going to be here for practice, and this is a routine, and you're part of a team, and you take your orders from above. In racing, everybody's on your own.
You're the only one in the car.
Yeah, and you're the only one paying for it too. It's an expensive hobby, and
You went to the second step with that too, didn't you? And you wrote a book about it.
yeah, well, that's it. That's how I didn't lose connection with racing people. Is I wrote the book, The Speediest Land Traveler, which, by the way, is most recently into its fourth printing. Not very big printings, but nevertheless, it's into its fourth printing. And it's 15 years now since it came out, and it's still, they're still selling them. So I've always liked writing. You asked about avocational things in general. Yeah, I've always liked writing too. So writing the book about racing seemed to be a natural, and I'm happy with the way it turned out.
As I recall, you helped write part of one of my books too.
Yes.
I think you go
you're
through another part.
Yeah, well, you're a multi-book author. I'm just a one-shot wonder.
Well, you picked a good one because the average novice writer writes one book, and 60% of the time there's never another.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I think that 60% may be a little low.
Yeah, I'm not surprised because unless you're writing something that's commercially saleable, it's going to cost you money. No,
Yeah, it does.
No question. And my book was a very, should we say it was a geographically limited book of an esoteric interest. In other words, auto racing in Alberta. Mm-hmm. That's all. So unless you have an interest in Alberta and have an interest in auto racing, this isn't going to be a Stephen King bestseller. It's, and I knew that going in.
Well, and it's a focus topic, and half, if not substantially more, of the enjoyment is just doing it.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And if you get some feedback that other people have enjoyed reading it, that's a plus.
Well, it got good reviews, so I was happy with that. I really enjoyed researching it because got to chat with some very remarkable people. On one hand, and I got to. I spent a lot of time in archives and looking up old newspaper articles. Like most people in Red Deer aren't aware that the very first stock car race in Alberta took place at Red Deer Fairgrounds in around 1949 or 50. And I like the way
that was an exciting time in Red Deer. That's when that same track was probably being used by the famous chuck wagon driver Johnny Phelan.
Oh, okay.
And he went on to win the Alberta title for as many years as he wanted to participate. So he became the reputation of Red Deer at the time, but I didn't know that extended in the off times to stock racing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, stock car racing was a new thing then, around 1950. It was race cars had been race cars. The idea of taking a passenger car and turning it into a race car was a relatively new concept, and it took off. It really took off. You didn't have to have the engineering skills to build a race car from the ground up. You just bought a used car, put a roll bar in and a roll cage, whichever, and found somebody who could drag a few more horses out of the engine, and and you went racing. And
There's been a lot of originality around the world with that as the concept, and cars as the vehicle.
yeah, for sure. It's it was interesting from a number of point of view. Like I say, the people I talked to and the things I learned were quite something. Style of journalism is another one that really caught my eye. How much it's changed over the century. The title of the book, "The Speediest Land Traveler." That sounds rather corny, I think, but I picked that from the Red Deer Advocate, because the first time there was a car race in Red Deer, which was sometime in the 1920s, I believe, the Red Deer Advocate reported that the automobile racer is far and away the speediest land traveler. I thought it sounds so corny. I got to use it. You wouldn't see that in a newspaper or a magazine today. You wouldn't see wording like that anymore. So it's really changed.
Yeah, you're reminding me of one of my books, and as you do your research, that the light suddenly comes on, and when I did Alberta's medical history, I entitled it "Young and Lusty and Full of Life."
Yes.
And that came from a 1912 presentation by the Calgary physician, Dr. H.G. McKidd, when he was giving his
Well, I didn't know that.
address.
I didn't know where you got that subtitle.
Well, I hope it's in the book somewhere.
Well, it is.
But you might have to read the McKidd chapter.
Oh, no, it didn't. Yeah, I didn't know it.
That's where it came from. He was very optimistic about the future of the West way back then.
Yeah, well, he was right then, eh?
Yeah, very true.
We've come a long way.
Yeah, I've enjoyed chatting with people like John Ralston Saul about all the originality and the motivation that comes out of the West. And then when I look at the West and look at it more microscopically, they say Alberta because it was settled last. And within Alberta, one of the highlight communities with a great future just because of it is Red Deer. And it's slowly beginning to demonstrate that. Some of your other avocational interests, you were mentioning that you were associated with the hospice in some fashion, because that's, as I understand it, the hospice is one of the few in Red Deer where it's a purpose-built facility. It's not a takeover from another one.
That's right.
And it comes out of a community interest with no guarantee when it finished that there would be government subsidies for any of the patient care provided.
Yeah.
So it really left a burden on the community to not only build it but operate it.
Yeah, well, I was not involved in the development at all. I sat on the board for a few years. I wasn't involved, but there were several doctors' wives. Bonnie Brado comes to mind immediately. And they got Brian Wilson, a realtor, involved, and Brian was very effective in going around Red Deer to all the service clubs and getting substantial contributions from them, and that's what kick-started the whole thing. So I think it's a remarkable facility. Like I say, I take no credit for the development of it. It was there by the time I made the board. So.
You know, those of us who've had some experience with it would certainly say it's a marvelous addition to the community at a time in life when there's so much stress.
Well, another marvelous facility in town that I was involved with, actually I was the board chair for a little over 3 years, was the Red Deer Symphony Orchestra. And I like music. Can't play, can't sing, but I love listening to it. And
you do have a piano here.
Yeah. I wonder who plays it. It was. I think it was just a wonderful development here, and people don't expect that in Red Deer. Tell you a little story. When I became president, I realized that there were cash problems where it was running out of money. How to raise some money. So I arranged for Ray Macbeth to come and speak to our board in terms of fundraising, how you raise money. And then I read in Maclean's magazine the fellow who was the chief fundraiser, whatever, for the Calgary Philharmonic had won some major award for marketing from some outfit in the U.S. I forget what it was, but it was there. He was the #1 man for the year in terms of promoting entertainment. So I thought, well, maybe this guy can help us. So I phoned him. I called the guy at the Calgary office, got chatting, and he says, just a minute. He says, Red Deer's got a symphony orchestra?
And he was in the business.
Yeah, he didn't know. He didn't know. And he was a great help. He came and explained to us that one-time tickets are a secondary interest. You live and die by your season subscriptions. I think we're seeing that with our hockey team in town this year too. Mm-hmm. Not many people are going to games, but they sold lots of season tickets so they can keep functioning. And it worked. It worked well for the Red Deer Symphony Orchestra. Mm-hmm. Trying to twist all these people who are buying singles, getting them into buying season tickets.
And we've, I think, only had one conductor, haven't we? Through most of that period.
Through most of the period. There was a fellow from Red Deer College was a conductor originally, and it was perhaps being a little too harsh. It was a symphony orchestra in name only. But then Alison Schaffaker, who was the president at the time, she recruited Claude Lapalme, and he's now been on the job for 30 years. And when you sit down there and listen, there's no mistaking. This is a symphony orchestra. A pretty good one, too. Mm-hmm. Yeah, Claude's, he's a remarkable talent. He really is.
Well, and having a symphony is remarkable, not only because Red Deer's so small, mm-hmm. but it's found a way to continue it, build it, make it better. And certainly has had some pretty exceptional people come in as soloists and
yes,
and people to perform along with the symphony.
There are other cities and towns who have symphony orchestras, and the one I'm most familiar with was Lethbridge because, let's face it, in the early days we weren't paying Claude much of a wage, so he was recruited by the Lethbridge Symphony too, and he commuted. And I was talking to these fellows at one point, and their president said, why don't you and your wife come down for Claude's next concert with us? So, heck of a deal. There was no comparison because all Red Deer musicians are paid musicians. They are professionals. In Lethbridge, for the most part, they were amateurs. The principal first violin, second violin, and cello were paid musicians, and they got a substantial paycheck. Everybody else was a volunteer. And I remember we down at the concert, and I met some of these fellows afterwards, and two of them were the sons of call it a U.S. border guard, somebody at the Coots border crossing. And this fellow really wanted his sons to be musicians. So he somehow got them up to Lethbridge for every rehearsal and every concert, and these teenage boys. That was sort of the level of the majority of the orchestra. They were happy volunteers. And the quality of music in Lethbridge was, despite the fact we had the same conductor, the quality of music was vastly superior in Red Deer to what it was in Lethbridge. So, other towns have symphonies, but I think Red Deer has a better one than the others.
Well, it's a nice way to put it, and a very nice legacy.
Yeah, I think so.
One of your other avocational interests has been in the Rotary International, particularly the Rotary Club of Red Deer. And you've been a member
29
like
years.
I have for not quite as long as.
No, you were already there. 29 years I've been a member, and I love it. The fellowship, the weekly luncheons, the fellowship is great, but it's the good things, the neat things we do that appeal to me. And one of them is the exchange student program, where students from other countries come to Red Deer, come to Canada, and they're here for a year, and they spend 3 months with each of 4 families. And I think we've had 9 over the years. and really just a really interesting mix of kids, and love them all.
And the attachments usually continue
Yeah.
for years afterwards because they're life-changing experiences for the students. And,
Sure.
And enjoyable experiences for the adopted parents.
Well, a couple I will mention is a young lady from Russia. She came over here, and she's still here. She married an Alberta, became a school teacher, married an Alberta school teacher, and they're still here. And the other one I'll mention is Berin Ozagul from Turkey. After she left, Berin was always emailing us, when are you going to come, when are you going to come? So finally, about, 8 years ago, I guess, Diane and I did go to Turkey. And her family was just so gracious. They just showed us around the country, and it was really remarkable. But now she's engaged, and she's going to get married. Oh, by the way, she's a Turkish equivalent of a chartered accountant. And she's an auditor for a big firm. So I'm thinking, in the Middle East, Turkey, having a female auditor come in and look at your books, it's got to cramp some guy's styles. But anyways, she wants to bring her new husband over here do their honeymoon here and go through some, yeah. Because she's been to Jasper, Banff. She was in Diane took her to Vancouver Island at one point, and she loved it here. And we love her, so come on over.
She was a lovely lady, but she arrived quite homesick because she spent the first 2 weeks with us, and she was having a hard time missing her parents. But
her parents missed her too. Little story, when I was chatting with her dad one day when we were over there, he admitted that that's their only daughter, that they thought it was a great idea, and they took her to the airport and got her on an airplane, and then they're driving back home, and he said, I had to pull off the side of the road. We were both bawling our eyes out. They have one child, this lovely daughter, and they sent her to a country on the other side of the world in a place called Red Deer. They knew nothing. And all of a sudden they've sent their only child over there, and he says, we were both bawling. I couldn't drive anymore. He says, I had to pull
myself. Dear, because I certainly remember when we had our black tie bingo in the fall, and she had somehow managed to bring with her an absolutely fabulous costume she wore that night. And I know one of the most colorful pictures I think I have ever taken on my camera was of her that night. And it was not just nice to see her again, but to see how she was highlighting her background. The remarkable, I guess, other half to that story is that the club exchanges this time with Turkey, and the exchange student from Red Deer that year was my son Jeffrey, and he wanted to go to Switzerland, but the student had gone to Switzerland the year before, so he wasn't eligible. Anyway, we got our application finally finished and by then it was late enough that he got what was left over, and that was the exchange trip to Turkey. And of all the places you could have ever picked for him to go, Turkey was by far the most maturing, the most filled with unusual experiences, and led us to going and visiting him twice during the year he was over there. But gave me a remarkable appreciation for a country that's kind of somewhere between Europe and Asia.
It's part of both.
But the people he met, the adopted parents, he is still in close contact with, that he had for the year. But anyway, those are just part and parcel of those experiences that are so life-changing. You were also involved with the Career Opportunity Fund, or have been almost since its inception. Dick, do you want to share a few highlights of that unique program?
Only about 10 years, and I love the program. you are introduced to some remarkable young people. And just by way of background, the Rotary for Opportunity Fund, I think it was the initiative of Jim Foster, and it's not a scholarship, it's a bursary. We're looking for financial need, as well as academic achievement and community involvement as well. And you really meet some remarkable kids. I'm talking about the sons and daughters of single parent families. I remember one young lady, her mother was a janitor, and she's trying to support her family on that. So this daughter, she had a part-time job, one of the convenience stores, and was working hard at that and still maintaining a high academic average and still involved in things at the school. Just remarkable. I almost wish we could give these kids more to get them going. It's depending on the interest rates and return on our investment and everything. The awards are between $2,000 and $2,500 a piece, which is nice, and it goes to first-year students, and that's when they really need it. So it's really, really helpful. I love the work it does. Every year we take all the applications and we get together with the Rotary District Community Foundation and with the counselors from the various schools involved, and then our own club committee, and we just go over these applications and score them. And I'll tell you, when you get down to the last number, depending on how many we can give that year, say 20. You get down to those last numbers, and it's hard choosing. It is difficult. The top ones are easy. The kid living with a single parent and packing a 90% average. Well, they're an in, but further down, it's still difficult. They're all worthy recipients. I don't think we've ever written a check for a student we shouldn't have.
No, it's certainly been one of the highlight projects of the club. I think it started as a 75th anniversary project. And Jim and Jack Donald, I think, were two of the people intimately involved, and Chris Warren, in getting it started. It's also a program that I think we've given out now to the community for the scholarships that we give, something over $400,000.
Oh, yeah.
And it has behind it almost $750,000
That's right.
on deposit with the community foundation.
Well, as interest rates go up, we should be able to make either more awards or greater awards. It's been hamstrung in recent years because any investment that's relying on interest just isn't doing very well.
For people who rely on fixed incomes, a real problem.
Yeah. So if interest rates rise, well, we should be getting a greater return, and we should be able to make more or bigger awards, which I'm happy for.
Well, it's been fun to be at least an indirect part of it, and watch the program continue maintained by people and provided continuity by people like you and Chris Warren.
Well, it led to other things too. I'm a member of the Central Alberta Vintage Auto Club, and I was a fairly new member. And one member, Malcolm Fisher, school teacher and town councillor from Stettler, he was administering an awards program that club had, which was to graduating high school students going into automotive apprenticeships. And it covers not just Red Deer, but all of Central Alberta. So Malcolm, a very persuasive fellow. Anyways, he stood up at a meeting one day and said, "Look, I'm having trouble keeping up with this. If anybody can give me a hand, talking to a few schools or anything, I'd appreciate it." So I spoke to him after. I said, "Well, I've done this thing with Rotary, so yeah, I'd be happy to give you a hand." Well, Malcolm was also the editor of the club newsletter, and when I opened next month's club's newsletter, there was the executive listed, and I was listed as the chairman of the scholarship committee. So. And if I can backtrack on that to another, Malcolm Fisher, he is good close personal friend of David McDonell, the judge,
from Stellar.
and previously defense lawyer for Robert Raymond Cook. And they make a presentation to junior high schools on this whole topic. They go and talk to the kids, as part of their history or social studies. They talk to them about the Robert Raymond Cook case, show how times have changed and how the justice system works and that sort of thing. So,
Neat.
yeah.
Neat.
So Malcolm roped me into that. And then from there, I was approached by the Specialty Vehicle Association of Alberta and asked to set up some sort of a scholarship program for them. And this covers all of Alberta, of course. And, we put it together in the past year, and both Sate and Nate will get scholarship money from the Specialty Vehicle Association of Alberta, which is a conglomeration of about 50 car clubs of all sorts, hot rods, sports cars, antiques, whatever. We put that together, so we're giving money to the two big tech schools every year.
Well, these are great stories. I was thinking of Jerry Tennant, talking with him the other day, and he was mentioning how the fund had started from a successful games that were held in Red Deer with a little extra money, which was set aside for organizing future games in Red Deer, and how that program had grown and turned Red Deer into not a mecca, but certainly a very favored community for holding mid-sized community national activities, particularly in the sports field. And there's a number of those around Red Deer, like the Waskesiu Park Foundation that came out of our 80th or 75th anniversary years in Red Deer. So I look forward to learning more of these interesting funds that I've never heard of, but are just quietly there for the time they're needed.
Well, talk to the Red Deer District Community Foundation, because they're holding an awful lot of that money.
That's another story that'll perhaps come up in one of our interviews.
Okay.
Look forward to hearing more about that.
Good.
Well, this I think concludes it, unless you want to add some comments about Diane and how behind every great successful man there's a motivating lady.
No, a surprised lady.
No.
Oh, Diane.
I certainly know that where goes Dick goes Diane.
Coming up to 54 years married, and she's just been a huge support all my life. No matter what I've done, she's gone along with. I mean, give up a secure job with a financial institution to start a property management agency. She was with it. And racing, it's an expensive hobby, and she's always encouraged me. As I said, I'd been out of it for 17 years, and I was 44 at the time, and I thought, really, I'd like to get back into it. So I took her to Earl's for lunch one day on the patio, and I said, I want to go back racing. How about for 2 years? And she said, sure. Well, I turned 2 into 6, and she was with me all the way. But the craziest story, and I didn't realize how crazy this was at the time, but we're just irresponsible, young kids, were in their early 20s. But 1967 racing season, sports cars came along, and I'd been trying to build a car and wasn't having any success at all. I slow on to go racing come the 1968 season. So 1968, they came out with sedan classes in sports car racing, A, B, C, and D, depending on engine displacement. Diane had just bought and financed a Ford Consul. And I looked at Ford Consul, and it would fit perfectly into sedan class C. So I bravely approached her and asked if she would mind if I put a roll bar in her car. She says, well, okay. So I took her car all over Western Canada while she's making monthly payments on it, and raced it everywhere from McDonell, Manitoba to Edmonton International Speedway. And actually we ended up second in the Prairie region in the C-Class sedan. So did fairly well with it. Had to rebuild the engine, but the insanity of a car that she still owes money on, and I'm putting it at risk on a racetrack for a whole summer. I mean, it's nuts. But there she was, hands me the keys to the car. God bless her.
Well, you can sure tell who's the driver in this family.
Oh, yeah.
As we close, Dick, do you want to relate that painting that sits behind us with this book and the story about how you came to acquire it?
Well, Diane acquired it, not me. Anyways, way back when this book came out, there was an article on Chinook Christmas, a book written by Rudy Weeb and illustrated by Dave Moore. The picture in the newspaper article was the picture you see behind you of a boy sitting on a bicycle with his coat open and letting the wind blow him along, no hands on the handlebars. I rode a bicycle for many years, and I immediately related to that. And I remember looking at it, and I showed it to Diane, and I said, I've never bought a piece of original art before, but I'm going to track down Dave Moore. We'd met him once or twice before, didn't really know him, but anyways, I'm going to see if I can buy that painting off him. So anyways, this was in November. Come the Christmas festive season, we're at some sort of a function, somebody's poor, and there's Dave Moore. So I'm going to make you a deal, sir. I want to buy that painting. I need that painting. And he said, well, I'm sorry, but it's already been spoken for. I said, oh, darn. Well, in that case, if you ever decide to put it into print, let me know. I'll buy a print off you. So anyways, flash ahead now from December to the following April, which is our 25th wedding anniversary. And I had the property management business, and Diane was working in the office, as she often did. She was working there. And I promised to take her out for lunch. So I'm bustling around town, and finally I get back to the office right about 12 on the button, and I come running back into my office, and there's Diane sitting with a big smile on her face, and Dave Moore with a hammer pounding a hook into my wall from which to hang the painting. So yes, it had been spoken for, but whereas I sat back and waited for an opportunity to approach Mr. Moore, Diane had immediately contacted him and offered to buy the painting off him. So she kept this secret from November through to the following April, and I was just absolutely shocked. So we all, Dave's wife Yvette was there. We went out for, I think I may have even bought lunch. I was just so excited about this whole thing.
What a great story, but
but then again, that's Diane taking the initiative to do something.
It's fascinating how you can, if you have interests, you can pull them together even on a small community basis, because David is certainly, from a mural point of view, is a very famous artist.
Oh, sure.
Way beyond Red Deer. And
yeah, he's a great guy, too.
To be able to put that together with the painting on the wall is, makes a small story quite significant.
It is significant.
Well, it's been a great pleasure, Dick. I know we haven't included Diane in it, but I appreciate the stories that you've shared with her, because she certainly is a significant part of your life and our Rotary life. And meeting with her, you could tell lots of stories about her. I think of the recent fundraising one she did visiting the grotto down in Canmore. But
oh yeah. Well, that one too.
Anyway, two very interesting lives from Red Deer. So thank you very much, Dick.
Thank you for your interest. Always enjoy chatting with you, Bob.